Howdy, howdy. So I'm Carlos, and I'm an AGI researcher. And the main question I'm interested in, my main research question, is what makes human minds so powerful? Um, I'm interested in it partly because it's fun. It covers a lot of different fields and that kind of thing. But I also think if we understood our minds better, we could actually upgrade them. I used to work on longevity research, and that's all about biology. I think there's also a more computational approach to longevity, where you say, like, well, let's just upload our brains. If we figure out how they worked computationally, we could then just program them from scratch and live as digital humans forever with backups and all that kind of thing. So there's a few different things that kind of motivate the research. But I think it's really fun. But anyway, this question about what makes human minds so powerful, I think it's based partly on like this common sense view that human minds are actually particularly powerful. I think some people will push back on that and say that dolphins and octopus and this kind of thing have their own intelligences that we should account for. I do think it's worth investigating all that sort of thing. But I think I'm sticking with the common sense view that humans are special, and that we're the only ones that are sending rockets to space and this kind of thing, and that's something to be accounted for. Anyway, I think that the key idea here, the key part of an answer to this question of what makes humans so powerful, is the difference between something which is capable of doing some things versus capable of doing anything. And the latter category of being able to do anything, I think of as being, universal. Some computers can only calculate certain things, and then a universal Turing machine can compute anything. And there's an infinite difference there. It doesn't matter how big it doesn't matter how big the number is that you can compute. It's infinitely different from doing anything, from infinity. So I think that difference is key to understanding what is different between the dolphin, the octopus, and so on, and humans. So it's not to say that those animals aren't impressive, but there's still an infinite difference between being able to do some impressive things and being able to do anything. So that'll kind of guide everything I talk about today, and it guides a bunch of my research, is this question of like taking on any given capability, whether it's creating new ideas or speaking a language or whatever else, and thinking about the difference between a system that can do some of those things and the ability to do anything. So yeah, I also say that, like, I'm just kind of explaining my overall approach to research here. That if one half of my research is about kind of understanding what makes humans special, that's kind of a very focusing question. I focus on humans and what makes them special. But there's also a sort of second half of the research, which is about zooming out and saying, okay, well, I am interested in humans, but perhaps one of the best ways to understand them is to compare them to other systems. Really, like, you can't say that something is special about humans unless you know that it isn't present in other animals. So you kind of have to explore other systems if you want to compare all these things. But anyway, the second half of my research is kind of exploring other animals, other AI algorithms, and even the broader process of biological evolution itself, which you might say, well, that's not an animal, but it is a creative process. And that's ultimately the kind of thing that I care about, is some kind of process, whether it's evolution as a whole or particular animals or AIs, some kind of process that can create new things, that can solve problems in some way. And I think viewed through that lens, you'd say, okay, well, evolution clearly solves problems. It comes up with photosynthesis and all the other kinds of things. It creates us. So it's doing something like creating new things, solving problems. So anyway, I think it's useful to study all of those different kinds of systems and kind of build up this broader picture, this broader perspective of how they all fit together. And then with that, armed with that information, you can then better say what makes human minds so powerful. So yeah, I sort of have these two elements to my research: this more laser-focused kind of aspect and this more broad aspect. But so let me move on to now saying, if my main question is about what makes human mind so powerful, I think that you could compare humans to other animals and things in lots of ways. You could look at them physically. You could look at them computationally. You could look at them in different ways. I think the key way to look at them is through epistemology, the study of knowledge, in particular, how knowledge grows, how knowledge is created. And there are really two halves to that discipline. The first is how new things are created. And then secondly, once you've created new things, how do you distinguish the good from the bad? So, really throughout this episode and, all of my research and everything, these two things keep coming up again and again and again. They are really the two pillars of everything I think about: variation and selection, creating new things and selecting among them, distinguishing the good from the bad. The words variation and selection pop into my head about 10,000 times a day, and so that's just classic Darwin. So I'll just repeat that continuously, and you can note that. But I think those are the two questions, those are the two activities that are most relevant to understanding where humans fit in the broader picture of things. It's not our physical makeup that makes us special. It's not a lot of things. There are many features to humans and other animals you could look at, the presence of fangs and whatever else. But I think the key thing is our relationship with knowledge, how we create new ideas, how we select among them, how we engage in variation and selection. So I think that is the key thing. And so, whenever anybody asks you or you think about, how animals and AIs and all these things compare, look first to variation and selection, how they create new ideas and how they distinguish the good from the bad. So that's what I focus on. And that mostly allows me to ignore a lot of neuroscience, a lot of physical details of how the bodies work and that kind of thing. Some of them, some of those details may be relevant, but I don't think they're the main story. I think if they are relevant, they're only relevant because of how they contribute to variation selection. So how do you So let me give you an example of some of the key problems that I work on. If my main question is, what makes human mind so powerful? And I think that the key question is, how do they create and distinguish ideas? Then I think one of the key things to look at here is the idea I brought up earlier about universality. Because many systems can create new things. AIs do it, animals do it. They try stuff. That's fine. But humans are special because it's not just that we can try some stuff. It's that we can try anything, ultimately. Over time, we have more and more things we can do. And eventually, it seems we can come up with any idea. So I think one thing you can look at is if you imagine there being this vast universe of all possible ideas that could be created, then you could ask of any given system, whether it's a squirrel or a human or whatever else, can it reach any point in that space? Or would we forever limited to some small region, some small planet in that larger universe? And I think with humans, the answer is we can get anywhere. And with squirrels, they have a very tiny region they can never leave. They're just never going to think of the idea for a rocket ship, whereas humans can. And so I think that's saying, to recap there, I think variation and selection are the important things. And I think universality, the ability to do anything, is always the key idea to have in mind when understanding what makes humans special. So if we just combine those two things and apply universality and questions about it to variation and selection, we end up with this first question now of, about asking, can a system create any idea? In that vast universe, can that system create anything in it? Can it reach any point in that vast space? And I think humans can. If we apply the idea of universality to selection now, we can ask, how does a system distinguish between good and bad ideas? If I give you chocolate and vanilla, how do you tell which one you like better? And in that case, you could give it a taste and so on, and that would tell you. But that same criteria doesn't help very much using your tongue doesn't help very much when trying to distinguish between like Newtonian physics and Einstein. The difference there is not really in the taste. So a different criteria is necessary. And if a system is going to correctly distinguish between these two things, it needs to be able to create and then use those criteria. And so I think the question is, can a system use any criteria to distinguish between ideas? And, this is important because if you were faced with a set of possibilities in some situation and a really great answer was there, the perfect answer is in front of you, but if you can't identify it, then you can't make use of it. So it really does matter that you can pick out the good from the bad. And again, this has to happen in different ways when you face different decisions. So, you could, if you give like a dog some selection between quantum physics and Newtonian physics or something like that, the dog, has, even given the right answers, even given good answers there, it's not going to do any better than chance at figuring out which is best. And if you cover the wrong answer with peanut butter or something, it'll definitely get it wrong because it's using the wrong criteria. So again, zooming out here, I think that what matters when trying to study how the mind works is variation and selection. Good old Darwinian processes here. How new things are created and how you distinguish between them. And then again, the key idea for understanding what makes humans special is universality. We can do anything. Every other system can only do some things. So having said a little bit about my overall research, I'm interested in what makes human minds so powerful. And having said a bit about the approach, it's about the relationship to knowledge, about how new things are created, how they're selected, variation and selection. I'll just say a bit about what I've been doing this week. So this week, I've been focused on something that kind of goes a little bit beyond variation and selection, or it's sort of how variation and selection are used. And the key idea here is what I call attention. And this is about saying, suppose that you have very powerful abilities to create new things and select among them. That doesn't mean that you will automatically use the right ones in every situation. So, Elon Musk knows a lot of things. You know a lot of things. Everybody has a zillion ideas in their head. But it doesn't pay to use the wrong ideas in a given situation. You need to use the right ones if you want to be efficient anyway. And so if you bump your head into a wall, you ought to be thinking about walls and heads and how to move them. And you shouldn't be thinking about like whales and intergalactic space. All of these ideas may be true in their own way and useful in some circumstances, but of all the ideas you have in your head, most won't help you in the situation. So the efficiency with which you solve the problem that you face depends a great deal on bringing the right ideas to bear on the situation. And this is exactly, one thing I said earlier is that it helps to compare humans to other systems, like biological evolution. And here is a great example, because humans are able to face some situation, figure out what ideas are relevant, and then use them, whereas biological evolution is not. When a new idea gets created in a human mind, it's because you think it's related to what you're seeing. When a new mutation arises in biological evolution, it just happens randomly. If a giraffe needs a taller neck, it has no way of knowing this and expressing that in the genes. Just some arbitrary part of the DNA will be changed and probably will be either useless and like neutral or actively harmful. And very occasionally it will be helpful. Whereas in the human case, the ideas we come up with, you may not get the right answer on the first try, but within about 10 tries, let's say, in an ordinary situation, very quickly at least, in something less than 1 million years, you will have a pretty good solution probably. And so just think about that difference between taking 10 million years versus 10 minutes to solve some problem. That's kind of the difference that we're talking about here. So, technically speaking, you can create new ideas and make improvements without all this. It's just very inefficient. If you do everything randomly, every once in a while you'll hit upon a good idea and you'll use it, and that's great. but it'll take you a billion years to get photosynthesis and all these other things. Whereas if you can direct the right ideas to the situation, then you can, get to space in 50 years or whatever. So the efficiency with which you solve problems and create new ideas and that sort of thing and make progress depends a lot on the specific mechanisms that you use to get the right ideas in the right situation. And I think like there are elements of this, like I like to call them mechanisms of attention, things like surprise or confusion, or just like logical inconsistency. If I tell you something like, my grandma woke up after 100-year sleep and then went to Alpha Centauri, like a bunch of things about that are going to immediately seem wrong to you. How do you go to sleep for 100 years? Longer than a usual lifespan. How do you get to Alpha Centauri? Isn't that in space? Your grandma, most people don't go to space. Isn't Alpha Centauri really far away? No one's ever been there. How did she get there? Doesn't it take it, like a million years or, however long to get there, traveling at the speed of light? Many, many things are about the story are in conflict with what you already know. And importantly, you have to have a brain which is capable of recognizing the conflict immediately, if that information is going to be any use. So again, just as with like a library, it doesn't matter that you have the idea if you never use it or if you don't use it in the right situation. So anyway, that's the overall topic I'm thinking about right now. And I think part of that is just figuring out like more about what that sort of phenomenon is and the different versions of it, and seeing like how our brains actually achieve that feat of figuring out what's relevant in a situation and understanding why all this matters. With that said, I think I got a few questions from Twitter here, so I'll just go through them real quick. One from Christian Dean. He asked, given that variation and selection matter, you have to create new things and choose among them. It seems like we only have control over the selection, but not with the creation of ideas. He kind of cites Sam Harris saying that if I ask you to think of 3 movies, you will just think of 3 movies, but you won't really know why. And then maybe you will have a better explanation as to why you chose one over another. You'll be able to explain that, but maybe not why you came up with those ideas in the first place. So he says, it seems like the generation of new ideas is mysterious, but the selection is not. I would say that it's the case that many of our ideas, both how we generate new ideas and how we select among them, may be hard to put into words. You just say like, this feels wrong. So that's a case of the selection criteria you're using being sort of buried in your brain and represented in a way which is hard to put into words. Maybe it involves years of experience. Maybe you're a musician, maybe you're a police officer, maybe you're somebody with this deep set of skills, and you have all these expectations, and it tells you this thing feels wrong and that thing feels right, though you have a hard time explaining why. And likewise, it may be that the new ideas that come to your head are also hard to explain. I don't think there's a difference between those two processes, variation and selection, which ones are more explainable than others. I think any idea can be hard to put into words. Yeah. So in people with a sense of taste, like I said earlier, it's just very hard to put into words very often. So that's Christian Dean's question. Now we have one from Convex Bets. He asks, will an AGI algorithm necessarily involve making conjectures and criticism? Or, like I had to say, variation selection. And yeah, that's exactly right. It absolutely depends on conjecture and criticism. And I just think there's like sort of like a logical or physical requirement, really, that you have, like, if you want to make progress, you have to come up with new things. There's just no logical way around that. You can't come up with better things if you never come up with new things. And if you can't distinguish what's good from what's bad and get rid of the bad, then you're just going to have this hugely inefficient process where you either don't recognize what's good and never use it, or keep generating more and more things, most of which are bad. So it's hugely inefficient. He asked another question, which is, how do you, what do we know about making the conjectures open-ended? And I think a big part of what matters for humans is what I said earlier. It's about universality, the ability to do anything. If a system can only do one thing, then it's not going to be open-ended. If it can only do 10 things, then eventually it'll run into some kind of barrier and stop. If it can do an infinite number of things, it can do anything, then that is also, then you have infinite opportunity for open-endedness. That said, like the ability to do anything in principle doesn't mean you'll actually do it in practice. Like if you just decide at some point not to make any more changes or to make changes in a loop so that you do these 10 things and you just keep cycling through those 10 things and never explore outside of them, then you won't ever explore that full space. So you'll sort of reach, this tiny region and stay within there. So I think having some randomness in there, let's say, but not getting stuck in a loop is a pretty important thing. He also asks, like, what do we know about how to achieve criticism to rule out, lots of conjectures, and how to. So my interpretation of this question is kind of like, how do we efficiently perform selection? If we have a bunch of options, how do we efficiently tell, okay, this one's good, and those other million are not? I'm sure there's lots of things to say about this, but I'll just share one quote from Karl Popper that I quite like. He says, the content of a theory is in what it forbids. And what he means there is that, if I have a theory that says, here's how the trajectory of if I throw a ball, here's the trajectory it will follow. That sounds like a theory about what will happen. And it is, but it's also, if you sort of look at it through a different lens, it's also a theory of all the things that won't happen. If I say the ball is going to be right here, that means it's not going to be anywhere else. And so that means, anybody who says it's going to be somewhere else is in conflict with the theory. So that means it's hugely useful in telling you not only, let's say what will happen or what could happen, but it also rules out lots of things. And so that gives you this ability to efficiently identify many things that might be wrong with some conjecture. So that was convex bets. A couple more questions here. One from Nathan Waters. He asked, what do you think is like the theoretical limit to the pace of knowledge creation? I think like we don't know the limit, but it does depend on computation. So ultimately the question is, is there a speed limit to computation? I think David Deutsch would say, based on a thread I've seen on Twitter, that you would think that there's like a limit to how small things can get, but there actually isn't a known limit. So perhaps it's possible to compute infinitely fast, in which case it's possible to create new knowledge infinitely fast. Question from Aaron Internet. He says, we always, as universal explainers, face the question of what do I do now? And this is always a moral choice. How do we optimally make these moment-to-moment decisions? I'd say that, we don't make them optimally, but we can improve. And the answer to how we solve that problem is the same as we solve all problems. We come up with some possible answers and we select among them. It's variation and selection all over again. And moral progress is partly about creating new options that are superior. So like, if you invent the taser, then you don't have to use a gun to stop somebody if you're a police officer. So that's just a new option that is available to them that may avoid them having to shoot people if they like pose a threat. So moral progress is partly about the creation of new options and partly about the creation of new criteria, like fairness, let's say. So if in the past, people just would not have noticed or cared about differences in fairness between the peasants and the aristocracy. If people do care about that now, they invent a new criteria, they then see it differently. And they can compare their options differently. So there's that. And last question here. I have a few from Violet Strawfish. He asked about consciousness and can we confidently rule out consciousness having any role in AGI when we don't really understand how consciousness works and the fact that our only existing general intelligence, us, is also conscious. My answer is pretty short. I don't think about consciousness. I don't understand consciousness. I only think about capability. like I can see and talk about very clearly, like the fact that something is going on computationally in human brains, and it's creating rockets, and they're going to the moon. And they are successfully exploiting patterns in physics to engineer things that can do these impressive things. So that's all I think about. And I think when people try to mix up questions of consciousness with questions of capability, I think it only hurts both questions. So I think it's helpful to sort of separate questions about, okay, this system can go to the moon, this system can figure things out, that system can't. That's a question about capability. You should just only focus on that. And if you're interested in consciousness, think just about that. This hard problem of consciousness, well, why is there a feeling in something at all? So that's what I think about consciousness. He also asks, do we necessarily need to understand how AGI works in order to develop it? Or could we develop a process that just ends up creating AGI and implements it without us knowing how it works? And I think my answer to that is that it's always possible to like just accidentally bump into the solution to your problem. If you're trying random combinations on a key or a lock, that may work. The odds are very against it. You often, like monkeys can get Shakespeare eventually, but may take a few billion years longer than you want to wait. So the question is really like, okay, if we're gonna think about accidentally bumping into it, that's only really going to happen if we're close. We're a couple random steps away. Since we don't know what the solution is, we don't know how close we are. So, it's always plausible that we could accidentally bump into it. But I'm guessing that we'll have to understand it first, and that it may be farther away than we realize. And by farther away, I don't mean in time. I mean sort of conceptually, like how many ideas away it is, and what kinds of ideas they are. But anyway, I think that covers everything I wanted to say here, which I'll just recap by saying, my main research question is, what makes human minds so powerful? And I think the key idea there is to look at universality, the difference between systems that can do anything and systems which can only do some things. Part of my research is about asking specifically about humans. Part of it is about widening the perspective to evolution and animals and AIs and everything. I think the most important things are variation and selection. I think that there's just no way of getting around the importance of having to create new things if you want to create better things, and figuring out which things you created are good and which ones are bad, so you can build on the good ones. Last week I've been working on this sort of relevance, how you bring the relevant ideas to a situation, so that you're not sort of working on useless things, and this will make you much more efficient. So with that, I will call it quits, and I'll see you next time.